Chapter 9. Ayianna peered into the shadows of her room, but only found Liam curled up in the corner. What had awakened her? If the thundering of her heart wouldn't subside, she'd never hear if someone was in her room or not. Liam continued dozing, which was a good sign. There was nothing to worry about. Was it evening already? How long had she slept? Ayianna slipped out of bed and stumbled to the water jar. She splashed her face with cool water. Her vision swirled and she gripped the edge of the chest. She rested her head next to the jar and sunk to the cold floor until the vertigo lessened. Finally, she rose and lit the oil lamp. Its faint glow cheered the room and calmed her nerves. She leaned against the wall and curled her arms around her knees. Her thoughts drifted to Saeed. Had he seen the king already? Would the king even care about her father's death? And what of her mother? Safe. She had to be. The men had followed her instead, but unease crushed her hope. She would not have peace until she saw her mother again. Liam yawned and stretched her front paws before her. She padded over to Ayianna, her toenails clicking on the wood, the only sound in the quiet shadows. The wolf nuzzled her shoulder and reclined next to her, closing her eyes again. Ayianna sighed. Why did she fret? It was over, wasn't it? Now she'd return home with her betrothed, tell her mother the devastating news, and then carry on as planned. She swallowed the lump in her throat. Maybe she could. Alarmed voices carried into the room from below. Ayianna stiffened. What was going on down there? Were there more men after her? Liam lifted her head, her ears twitching, but she didn't move any farther. No, the speakers could be alarmed for any reason. What if it was about Dagmar? Her unease mounted. Ayianna crawled over to the door and eased it open. Its hinges whined in protest. She cringed. What? A rough voice hollered. Let him talk, another voice drawled. Let him talk. Can't you see he's a bit shaken? There were so many of them, wretched, smelly creatures. They crawled right over the walls. We didn't stand a chance, a younger voice replied. Ayanna's breath caught in her lungs. Right over the walls, you say? What manner of beast was it? The rough voice interrupted again. I don't know. I've never seen them before. Nobody can be safe if they climb walls like trees, the rough voice bellowed. But that wasn't all. They had a giant troll. A what? Who would do this? Another voice popped up. Can you not guess who? A hoarse voice replied. Evil lurking in the shadows. Dagmar destroyed. The pearl stolen. Silence, answered the man. It's her who never sleeps, moaning in the depths of the abyss, waiting for the perimeter to weaken, waiting to return and reclaim what was taken from her. You're just trying to scare us. Am I? Mark my words. Whoever stole the pearl is a pawn in the underworld's return to power. The inn shuddered with the explosion of garbled voices as the men downstairs tried to talk over each other. You simpletons, roared a voice. Have you never heard of the dagger Ramoja? Yes, the traveling bards sing of it quite often, a soft voice said. It is said that any man who possesses the dagger would have power beyond the guardians. No, another voice protested. The dagger brings only death and destruction to the bearer. Fools, you weary me with your tales. Who are you calling a fool? A small voice asked. Didn't you hear what the boy said? It's hopeless. Hopeless? Have you forgotten the Guardian Circle? Isn't it their job to protect and guide Nalu? A calm voice said. Did they even survive the attack? The rough voice asked. I don't know, the young voice stammered. I didn't see them. It would take a lot more than a giant troll and a handful of imps to destroy the Guardians. The calm voice was familiar, but Ayianna couldn't place it. Was it Kale? But why would he be down there? What good would it do us if they did survive? They're just a bunch of old fools who've outlived their purpose, a hoarse voice said. Old fools, eh? The calm voice said. The voices fell silent again. Chairs squeaked as the men shifted in them. "What's your name, boy?" the calm voice asked. A chair scuffed the floor as if someone stood up. No, it wasn't Cale. Desmond? He didn't seem to be the type to be interested in matters pertaining to the Guardians. But then, she hardly knew him. "I am not a boy," the hoarse voice responded. "By my standards, you are. You sure know quite a bit about the dagger and the pearl." "And you know quite a bit about the Guardians. Perhaps you're one of them," the hoarse voice said. "If you'll excuse me, I have other matters of greater concern than the tavern's latest gossip. Good evening." His footsteps, one heavier than the other, exited the tavern. Ayianna pulled back from the door, but froze as heavy footsteps climbed the stairs. Her heart pounded, but the footsteps disappeared into one of the rooms. Ayianna heaved a sigh of relief and closed the door. She darted to the window, hoping the man had lingered in the street. Several crows scattered as she opened the shutters. Shadows mingled together in the streets. Merchants closed down for the night. Farmers disappeared over the horizon, returning home with their profits and newly purchased supplies. Stars twinkled in the heavens. The pure white city glowed in the moonlight, but no lone stranger walked down the street. Ayianna exhaled the pent-up tension. How beautiful and peaceful it seemed. How ordinary it all appeared. Dagmar's nightmare seemed so distant. If it hadn't been for the conversation she had just overheard, she might have doubted the reality of the horror that haunted her. Tears stung her eyes and she blinked them away. She sank to the bed. Liam ambled over and laid her head on Ayianna's lap. Ayianna scratched the wolf's ears. Tears slid down her cheeks. "Father and Taryn are gone." Liam jumped to the bed and curled up next to her. Ayianna buried her face in the thick white fur. She gritted her teeth. Anguish pierced the core of her being. The ache, so sharp, so real, she thought her heart would fail. She needed a distraction. She stood and paced the room, hugging her waist. But the more she paced, the more her thoughts fixated on the one thing she fought so hard to avoid. Would she suffocate in her own room? Liam stretched out across the bed and rested her head on her paws, her pale eyes following Ayianna back and forth across the room. She flipped her tail as if to voice her disapproval of her master's pacing. Ayianna halted. "What do you expect me to do? I can't leave this room and roam the city by myself." She slumped next to Liam. "We need to get home to Mother. She's probably worried herself sick." Her thoughts dove back to her father's death and the blade meant for her. How can I bring such news to her? Liam nudged her nose under Ayianna's arm, and Ayianna sighed, trailing her fingers through Liam's fur. She would do it. Her father's death would not be in vain. She'd make it right, make her father proud. Mother will know what to do and what father's message meant. Ayianna straightened. Perhaps I can find Saeed. Maybe he could make arrangements with Desmond and we could go home tomorrow. Liam's ears perked up. She twisted her neck toward the door, and a few moments later a knock came. "Madam, your clothes!" The door creaked open, and a thin maid entered, her dress too big for her and gathered to her waist by the strings of her apron. A brown scarf covered her hair and wrapped around her neck. She nodded and held up a large bundle. "Master Desmond has requested your company for dinner this evening. He asks that you wear the burgundy one." She curtsied and left. Burgundy one? Ayianna closed the door and unwrapped the package. 2 dresses slipped out. One was a plain green, the fabric and design typical of the Plains people. She placed it on the bed next to its matching headscarf. The other dress was burgundy, its fabric soft, unlike her own garments. Delicate embroidery lined the blood-red bodice and gave way to a layered skirt below. She shook her head as the silky layers slid through her fingers. A dress fit for a lady. Her stomach fluttered and then fell flat. How could she pass as a lady of Badera? No, she would learn. Her father's death wouldn't be in vain. She yanked the nightgown off and slipped the new dress on. Its light fabric slid over her skin. She lifted her arms and the flared sleeves shimmered. She swirled around the room, the dress billowing at her ankles. "What do you think, Liam? Isn't it beautiful?" Liam burrowed her muzzle under her paws and flipped her tail again. Ayianna smiled. Perhaps she should unbraid her hair. Someone pounded on the door and Ayianna jumped back. She bumped into the wooden box, causing it to screech loudly across the floorboards. Her heart jumped into her throat. "Ayianna?" a muffled voice asked through the closed door. She took a deep breath and opened the door. Desmond's smile turned to concern. "Are you all right? You look a little flushed." Yes, I'm fine, thank you." She calmed her racing heart and smoothed her new dress, suddenly feeling naked without her usual woolen apron. "You look beautiful." His eyes swept the length of her. "But you are forgetting something." "Oh, of course." Her face burned even hotter. She returned to the bed, snatching the matching scarf and wrapped it around her head and neck. Desmond smiled and held out his arm for her. She hesitated. "Aren't I supposed to walk behind you?" "Not when we are courting." She slid her hand under his arm. A spicy smell assaulted her nose. Had he just washed up, or was he trying to cover up the stench of a busy day? She studied him out of the corner of her eye as they made their way down the stairs. His short, blonde hair had been smoothed back. His slender face ended in a square jaw, which, at the moment, he was clenching. Was he just as nervous as her, or was he angry? She stumbled, but he steadied her with his other hand. Heat crept into her face. How could she be so clumsy? Falling down the stairs and taking him with her was not how she wanted to start out the evening. For the rest of the way, she focused on the descent. He led her through the inn's main dining area and under the wide arches to a private table in the back. A small candle flickered in the middle of a setting for two. A delicious aroma of roasted fowl wafted through the room, and Ayianna's stomach growled. Desmond pulled a chair out for her, and when she sat down, he seated himself across from her. "Did you sleep well?" he asked as he pulled out a large square cloth and tucked it into his neckline of his doublet. "Yes, thank you," Ayianna said, copying his actions. Desmond shook his head. Ladies are supposed to lay the cloth over their laps. "Oh." Her face grew hot, and she shifted in her seat. I'm sorry." She removed the cloth and draped it over her dress. He carved into the small bird and slid a portion onto Ayianna's plate. "Do you like duck? It's Cuthbert's specialty." "I've never had it before." "Well, eat up." His face broke into a bright grin, revealing two dimples in the center of his cheeks. He grabbed the bird's leg and bit off a chunk. Ayianna took a bite and chewed it slowly, savoring the tender, salty morsel. She couldn't remember the last time she had even had meat. "I like it very much." "I knew you would, but we must take great care in introducing such fine foods to you. Otherwise, you will get sick." She tried not to frown and slowly nodded. Humans and their odd customs. She might not have had duck before, but she had lived among the elves. Of course, she probably shouldn't mention that, so she pierced a roasted potato chunk with her fork and stuck it into her mouth instead. They ate together in awkward silence for a while. Ayianna tried to think of something to say or ask, but then she remembered her mother's social etiquette. Ladies do not speak unless addressed, and in proper fashion. What was proper fashion? At least she didn't have to break the silence. Desmond didn't seem to be disturbed by the lack of conversation. He dined eagerly, as if he hadn't eaten all day. He devoured most of the duck and emptied his wooden goblet of wine twice during the course of the meal. Once finished, he wiped his hands and face on the square cloth. He picked up his goblet and swirled its contents. "Ayianna," he said, finally breaking the silence, "I had almost forgotten how lovely you are." He drank deeply and set the goblet down. He pointed to her untouched wine. "Drink, it's good for your stomach." Ayianna lifted the goblet and sniffed the dark liquid inside. A sharp fragrance of berries and mint stung her nose. She took a sip. The wine, sweet and bitter, burned as she swallowed. The warmth spread from her throat to her stomach into the rest of her body. Desmond leaned back and crossed his arms. Integrity, trustworthiness, honesty, obedience. Words that define a lady. The lady of a castle must carry out her duties and fulfill her roles as such, especially in the absence of the Lord. Otherwise, why would the Lord choose her to be his wife? "I understand that you are ignorant of many things above your station in life. For you, there is grace, but correction remains inevitable. How else shall you learn?" Her stomach sank. What had she done wrong? I'm disappointed in the choices you've made. From my understanding, you had plenty of chores to do with the harvest season coming to a close, but instead, I find you traipsing over the countryside like a common whore. If this behavior continues, you will bring disgrace to your family and to me. She gritted her teeth. But my father... And I would like to add, Desmond continued, you are betrothed to a man above your station, yet you are found in the company of a shirtless half-breed? Half-breed? She choked on the words. Desmond shook his head. Obviously, you don't know the significance of your actions. Perhaps after a couple of days in the city, you'll see for yourself. But I can't stay here another day. I must go home. My business trip won't be finished until the end of the week. You will have to wait until then. But my mother, I can't. You should have thought about that before. Now you will have to wait till I have finished conducting my affairs. Ayianna leapt to her feet. The chair fell backward and crashed into the stone floor behind her. My father told me to go to Dagmar and find my brother. What was I supposed to do? Disobey him? You don't even care what I have been through. You sit here sprouting trite, overbearing laws. I've seen horrors, death, and cruelty. People dead, blood everywhere, Dagmar destroyed. Ayianna! Desmond's face clouded. He stood, his gaze darting down the hall. Voices rumbled in the main dining area as the evening guests ate their meal. He placed his hands on the table. You must cease this outrage. No! The tears came spilling down her cheeks. My father is dead. My brother is dead. Do you even care? Ayianna shook, and her trembling legs buckled. Desmond's scowl slipped from his face. Instead, concern flickered in his eyes. He reached for her just as she collapsed. Sliding to the floor beside her, Desmond held her tight against his chest. She struggled to push him away, but her strength failed. Grief ruptured her thin facade, and she cried in his arms. Ayianna, Desmond murmured and stroked her forehead. She opened her eyes. She was back in her room, laying on the plump mattress. Desmond sat next to her, her hand in his. Had she fallen asleep? She struggled to sit up, her vision swimming, but Desmond shook his head, brushing her cheek with his finger. Ayianna lay down, looking up into his handsome face, now ashen with concern. She looked away, ashamed of her outburst. Ayianna, he said. He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it. I was hoping that our first meeting could have been different. Desmond, Ayianna began, but he pressed his fingers against her lips. You wear your father's betrothal gift. Desmond fingered the hairpin's delicate petals. Why me? She asked. He raised his eyebrows. What do you mean? Why did you choose me out of all the other girls? Well, you were different. Most of the other girls threw themselves at me. I was like a hunk of meat to a pack of ravenous dogs to them. You, on the other hand, didn't see me at all. You ignored me. I did not. Who is telling the story here? His face broke into a smile, revealing his dimples, his blue eyes twinkling. You are a hard worker, dependable, so my uncle tells me, and I thought to myself, now here's a girl for me, trustworthy, beautiful. Must I go on? Ayianna smiled. She could look into those blue eyes forever. Desmond leaned over and kissed Ayianna on the forehead. Tomorrow is the feast of Jeju. You can watch the parade from the balcony if you want. I have some business to finish, but I'll return in the evening. Feast of Jeju? You should sleep. Please tell me about the feast. It is a feast honoring the sacred pearl and commemorating the fall of Ramoja, if you believe all the stories and legends the bards sing about. Nowadays, people welcome any reason to come together and celebrate. Others, like me, look forward to it because people's moods are brighter and they tend to lighten their purses quicker. Quite a lucrative time for us merchants, I must say. Oh, in Zuriel we have a similar celebration, but we call it Johizi. Zuriel? Her throat closed up. What had her father told Lord Ramiro? Wasn't Prayton supposed to be her birthplace? She swallowed, hoping her face didn't give her away. We spent some time there." "Oh, of course," he smiled. "Well, it's late. Time for you to rest." Placing the betrothal pin beside Ayianna, Desmond stood. He closed the shutters and dimmed the lamp. "Sleep well." Then he was gone, out the door and down the stairs, his footsteps disappearing into the night. Ayianna lay there for a few moments, her heartbeat the only sound echoing in her ears. That was too close. How could she keep up with all the lies? She exhaled the mounting tension and turned her thoughts to Desmond. He no longer seemed a stranger to her, but a friend who cared for her. Perhaps everything was going to be all right if she could manage to remember her father's lies. Her father, her brother. How could she even think like that? Tears stung her eyes again, and she curled into a ball, her thoughts and feelings threatening to consume her. Nails clicked on the floor. Liam sprang into the bed and stretched out next to her. Ayianna buried her face in the wolf's musky fur. No, she wouldn't think right now. Instead, she would cling to the memory of her father, her brother, and their faith. If Osaran truly existed beyond the land of Nalu, her father's death would not be in vain. She could endure the path set before her, one day at a time.